If you look at certain times in European history, I would say that probably most people, or I would say very few people, thought it was a great idea to have complete religious freedom. And there are certain parts of the world, some of them not too far away, where over 90% of the people feel that if you change your religion, you should be killed. Over 90% of the people. So it's, where is this coming from? I'll tell you where it's coming from. There's actually an internal logic. There's actually an internal logic to this, and the logic is valid if you make just a few simple, monstrous assumptions. The first assumption is that God is a psychopath. I mean, you don't say that, but that's what it amounts to. God is a psychopath. So that if you join the wrong religion, God will torture you, send you to hell forever. I mean, forever is a very long time. I mean, imagine having a child. Imagine your child being in pain and screaming, crying out to the mother or the father for help. And the supreme loving Father can hear those screams and those cries for millions and billions of years and never help the child because billions of years ago, in an infinitesimal little human life, you joined the wrong church. And you actually believed in me and tried to serve me, but wrong church. If and this is not just about one religion and another, if the God of the fanatics, if the God of certain fanatics, if God was really like that, God would be the most evil being ever conceived of by a human mind. God would be the most evil being ever conceived by a human mind, which is interesting because the famous, ontological argument for the existence of God given by Anselm in the High Middle Ages, he said, God is that being than whom no greater being can be conceived. And if you say God doesn't exist, I can imagine a greater God, one who doesn't exist. It's kind of a logical trick rather than a really convincing argument. But that was his idea. His idea, and that was Rupa Goswami's idea. Actually, Rupa Goswami has his own version of that argument, by the way. The idea was that because God is infinitely great, here's the argument basically. God is infinitely great. Therefore, the greatest conception of God is closest to the truth. It's like if you have an infinite number, then the highest finite number is, in a sense, going toward infinity. So the idea here is that if the greatest being imaginable is God, how could the most evil being imaginable be God? And I will give you 10 seconds here. If you can think of a more evil being, we'll give you a free cookie. But the point is, try to imagine something more evil than torturing your own children forever just because they slightly misunderstood you. And what's more evil than that? But now let's say you believe that evil assumption. It's not just wrong, it's evil. So let's say you believe that. It's evil because it shows God as being evil. It's evil to say that God is evil. So let's say that you believe that. Now, if someone's a false preacher, in other words, preaching the wrong religion, anyone who believes that false preaching will be tortured forever. Or something else similarly undesirable. So, therefore, you are morally required to stop that false preacher. You warn the person. If they don't stop, you kill them. For example, let's say, God forbid, like in America sometimes, someone goes to a school and starts shooting people. Now, when the police come, they're just going to stop that person. Their first concern is not, no, just shoot him in the leg, don't hurt him. Someone is in a school shooting children, you take the person down, you get rid of the person, and you do it as quickly as you can. And, frankly, you shoot to kill. So, In that way, if you really believe that anyone that listens to this preacher is going to suffer the most horrible possible suffering, it is your moral duty to remove that preacher from society. And even if someone leaves their religion, they also have to be killed. Why? Because it's a bad example. Bad examples should be punished with death. Because if other people follow that example, anyone that follows that example will suffer the most horrible consequences. Therefore, it is morally required of you to kill that person. Now, it's interesting because actually, Paul, who became Paul of the New Testament, was doing that. He was killing followers of Jesus. It's mentioned in the New Testament. The first martyr after Jesus was a Greek-speaking Jew called Stephen, and he was arrested for, following Jesus, or he was stoned to death. I don't even know if he was arrested. I think some people it was a vigilante mob, and they stoned him to death, and Paul was one of the people organizing the event, which tells you something about, frankly, his psychology. So, but the point here is that it is perfectly logical to religious fanatics to do evil things because they begin with an evil assumption. And we should remember that in logic, an argument may be valid but not true. A valid argument is simply an argument in which there is a properly logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. For example, here's a valid but an untrue argument, that all horses have wings. Turtles are horses. Therefore, all turtles have wings. That's actually a valid argument, although it's ridiculously false. I mean, it's obviously not true, but the relationship, but it's a false argument. It's untrue. So there's an internal logic in religious fanaticism. The problem, the obvious flaw, the obvious mistake in all forms of religious fanaticism, the obvious mistake is that it's based on assuming that God is a jerk or God is evil. If you start with the assumption that God is infinitely loving and infinitely good, then what would a loving, good parent do with children that love the parent in different ways? Kill them?